Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Harris. You can find me on Twitter at DanHarris80. Tuesday is usually the Dan and Kyle show, but Yates is unable to make it today. We have a very mediocre fill-in. It is Joe Pisapia, author of the Fantasy Black Book series, host to many, friend to all. You can find him on Twitter at Joe Pisapia17. Joe, thank you for filling in today. I can say confidently that you are better than not having a show at all.
Wow, the standards are really high here, I could tell. By the way, I like that what you said. I might have to steal that for the Twitter handle there. So what did you say? I'm a host of many things, but master of none? Something like that. I don't know. I loved it.
It's basically, I said friend to all.
Friend to all.
You know, which
host
is
to many.
Pretty adequate.
Father of two. Yeah.
Father of two. Absolutely. Because there's no disputing. Friend to everyone. I don't know. Whatever.
Friend to most.
All right. So this is kind of a weird show, guys. I'm just going to lay it on the table for you here. Not only obviously is Kate's not here and it's Joe Pisapia, which is already weird. But look, it's Thanksgiving week. Okay. For the most part, your trade deadlines have passed. Joe, do you have any leagues where your trade deadline hasn't passed yet?
No, yeah. I don't. And typically, I'm getting questions about some of that too. And I would say that if you're always worried about teams, first of all, if you're worried about teams making collusive deals, then you shouldn't be playing with these people, number one.
Correct.
Number two, if you are playing and you just want to make sure you eliminate this, it's a very simple thing to do. When someone is mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, you just don't allow them to trade. You put it in the Constitution, it's in there, and then you don't have this problem. Or move your trade deadline to week 10, where there's a better chance of somebody being an even record, things like that. So, I mean, there's so many things to, alleviate the stress of trade deadlines that you could do, and I don't know why people always make it so difficult on their leagues and so difficult on themselves as commissioners.
Are you pro or anti-veto?
I am 100%, 1,000,000 times anti-veto. You are opening up Pandora's box to everything in the eye of the beholder. And trades are fun. Trades are a part of fantasy football. It should be something that you do, and it should be something you want your leagues to be active. When you veto trades, first of all, you then all of a sudden have to make sure that everybody likes everything, and everybody who vetoes trades sometimes their own self-interest at heart. I know I would. I mean, that's the whole point. It's like, I want to win too. I don't want that person to make a good trade, so that's stupid. Then you kind of prohibit trades in a sense because the people are worried about the judgment they're going to get from everybody else from trades, so you're killing your activity in the league. The eye of the beholder value. There's so many reasons for it. And if you're worried about collusion in your league, again, you are playing with the wrong people. Stop. You're playing. You need to get better friends like me, friend to all.
Yeah, I'm really glad we had you on this show because you're already you're bringing the thunder right off the bat, which I love. No, I agree with you. I don't mind the sort of commissioner control sort of thing where you have to prove it. I have that in something, but I'm a commissioner in most of my leagues. I have never not approved a trade. It's more of like a backstop if it's sort of an accidental acceptance.
The only reason that you can do the commissioner tool is because you and I know as commissioners in the past, everybody has that once or twice a year where you go, oh, I accidentally hit accept on this trade. Exactly. And then it's just easier to go and back it out. That's it. That's the only thing.
I like it. All right, we're off to a good start. Now,
there we go.
It's going to be a little bit of a different show today. Probably a little shorter than usual, but we're going to recap Monday Night Football. Good game, of course, like we always do. We're going to talk about some of the latest news. There's obviously some implications for at least one of the Thursday night games with the Ravens and the Steelers, and we're going to talk about some general strategy going forward here, not necessarily specific players, just some strategy as we head into the final stretch. If you're headed for the playoffs, we'll talk about a couple of things that you might want to be looking at, and then we'll close with a very brief listener mailbag. But first, are you following us on Instagram at FantasyPros? You should be. Quick hitting, informative graphics that we put up all day long. We do chats. I do a Sunday morning Instagram live from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Kim Kardashian says it is the best account on Instagram. That's a joke. Only the fifth best. But still, you want to be informed. You want to be engaged. Follow us on Instagram at FantasyPros. All right, let's get to last night, my friend. Good game here. Rams 27, Bucks 24. Jared Goff 39 of 51 for 376 yards, 3 touchdowns. He does throw a few picks. Tough matchup, Joe. I wasn't expecting much in this one. They've got San Francisco, Arizona, Patriots, Jets. Do you think that Goff is somebody that fantasy managers can kind of ride into and through the playoffs here with that schedule?
I think they can. It's funny. I had them on that list we were talking about. You said be ready with your playoff teams and things like that. And the Rams are one of those to discuss. And it's also Goff because you see their lack of commitment to running the football. Cam Akers just scored his first touchdown of the season. Okay. It's week 11. or it just was week 11. So let that sink in for a moment.
It's week 12, man. It's week 12.
It's week 12 now, yeah. So, but I mean, seriously, like, I mean, that's insane when you think about it. Like, that's where we are right now with that running game, and it's a complete cluster, and they looked like they just wanted to throw the ball and throw the ball and throw it some more. And look, I think they did a good job there, the Rams, because what they did is they ran a lot of misdirection in the first half of this game, where you have an aggressive defense. The best thing you can do is to get them to be overly aggressive. And the Rams did that successfully in the first half of this football game, and they were able to, to make them bite on a couple plays and turn around and throw the ball to Woods, throw the ball to Cooper Kupp, who had a great game, and they were able to move the football that way. And then the second half, of course, you got, your Jared Goff mistakes in there, but then Tom Brady said, hold my beer, and he gave even more mistakes. And we all know the secret to beating Tom Brady is the same. It's put pressure on him. I think at one point he was 0 for 6 with a pick against pressure in that game, well into the third quarter. So it's always the same story. And if you're able to rattle him, you're able to get to him and physically push him around a little bit, and on top of that, not support him with the run game, which I don't understand. It's a good thing I'm recording this video too. I hope this all works, because you could see the frustration in my face with this. I've watched more Tom Brady than most people in my lifetime as a Patriots fan, okay? And I can tell you this, in the last 3 years, if you do not support Tom Brady with a run game, support him with play action, he is going to look like he looked last night. A couple weeks ago against the Saints, he looked terrible, right? They had an all-time low in terms of rushing the football. What, he had 5 carries, I think, for the entire backfield. You get back to Ronald Jones running the football last week. How do the Bucs look? They look really good, right? Now, all of a sudden, you're right back to that same thing again, where you're not running the football efficiently. And I understand Fournette had some drops in the backfield too, and that did not help. But still, you can't get away from running the football with Tom Brady. It is death to him at this point in his career. And I understand Bruce Arians and him get, pass happy, and they want to be aggressive and throw the football, and they have all these wide receivers and all these fun toys. But Dan, it is crazy to me that you can't look at the success of the games that you play really well and the games where you fail. And the Bucs, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the Bucs after they beat the Packers, and we went, oh, look at the Bucs. The Bucs are the best team in the NFC. And then they lose to New Orleans, and then you see the Packers lose to the Vikings, and the Packers barely kind of step over the Jaguars and then lose to Indianapolis. And everything's very eye of the beholder in the NFC right now. And I got to tell you, like right now, I think they're all just kind of in a giant cluster. I don't think anybody's ready to emerge yet from the NFC. But for me, this game is, if I'm a Tom Brady owner, or if I'm, a Bucs fan, I'm frustrated, because you have to get to run the football. You have to get that play action. You have to get defenses somehow honest, because if you don't, Tom Brady's going to throw picks. Tom Brady doesn't have the same arm strength and the same zip on the ball that he used to.
So this is how good Joe is, and this is why I'm so glad he came on the show, because I asked him about Jared Goff.
Yeah, and I turned
it
playoff
Tom schedule,
Brady.
And it became a diatribe.
I answered that.
And look, it's fine. It's fine.
Good.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. First of all, there are a couple things. We're gonna go to the Bucs.
You were sitting there for the last 20 minutes waiting to make fun of me for that, and I love you for it.
Joe, you will watch this on YouTube afterwards, and you're just gonna see me sort of.
But I answered your Jared Goff. I said, San Fran, Arizona, New York. Why
don't you just host a podcast? Joe, all right. Why don't you just host a podcast and just lead us whatever direction? Hold on. Let's talk about the Bucs here. First of all, I'm always willing to talk about Tom Brady, because, of course, he has been my nemesis since, as you know, I'm a Jets fan and I live in New England. That's fine. But the one thing you will say is, like, his closing schedule, to the extent you're relying on him, I mean, Minnesota, Atlanta, Detroit, he's
good.
Yeah, he's going to be fine in the playoffs. So real life, fine. Real life, look, NFL teams, you probably don't know this. Tom Brady does not do all that well under pressure, so get some pressure on him. But for fantasy purposes, he's probably going to be fine. But let's talk about the running game then to the Bucs. We'll come back to the Rams, but we're already off track here. There is absent a scenario where one of Ronald Jones or Leonard Fournette gets injured, will you ever feel comfortable starting either back in a fantasy matchup?
And you know what? No. Absolutely no. And I think that here where we're at is, I can't believe after 2 weeks ago, where Ronald Jones ran amok, literally ran amok all over the place. 98-yard run, right? Had 100 yards on top of that 98-yard run.
Yep.
How do we just abandon that? And it's Bruce Arians. And I love Bruce Arians. He's one of my bald brothers. I support him 100%. I love the hat. I love the look. I love the whole thing. But Bruce Arians at times also falls in love with the toys. And I think Bruce Arians also has always been a guy, you go back to the Pittsburgh days, who always wanted to throw the football and always wanted to be a little bit more reckless and aggressive. And that's great at times. And then there's other times where you can't be. Even in the season where he took over as head coach for the Colts. People remember that was kind of a breakout for Andrew Luck, right? All of a sudden everything opened up there for him, and that was really fun. But this is not a 20-year-old quarterback. This is a 43-year-old quarterback, right? This is an older quarterback. You have to support him with the run, and that's just, it's incredibly frustrating. And I think that Fournette next year will be somewhere else. I don't know where that place is going to be, if it's going to warrant at least speculative buys as an RB3 potentially. But looking at the landscape of fantasy football next year, I think you're crazy not to be playing 3 wide receivers and a wide receiver at flex. I think you're crazy to make big-time investments on backs where you're just questioned about. And if Ronald Jones is the last guy there going in next year, then maybe I feel better. But you're right. On a weekly basis, how can you be confident in Ronald Jones or Leonard Fournette or this backfield collectively? They just continue to abandon the run, then they correct, win games, and then they go back into the same pattern. It's very frustrating.
And even if you felt like you could rely on, and they would rely on the run, even if you knew going in, you'd be like, you know what? They know that this pass-happy approach right now is not going to work. They're going to change it right now. You would have no idea which one is going to do it. Because like you said, right? Rojo coming off this monstrous game where, by the way, again, the craziest thing about that game was that he fumbled on the first drive, and everyone was like, all right, good night. We're not going to see you again. It's going to be Fournette. And then he has, one of the biggest games that you can for a running back. So it's really crazy. I mean, Rojo, 10 carries for 24 yards. Fournette, 7 for 17. He does find the end zone, and he drops at least 2. They called it 3 on the broadcast. I wasn't sure about the third one, but yeah, it was ugly. Meanwhile, Antonio Brown plays the fewest snaps of any of the wide receivers, but 13 targets, 8 catches, 57 yards. Chris Godwin, 10 targets, 7 catches, 53 yards. He does score that great touchdown.
Yeah,
and Mike Evans scores
great effort.
Yeah, that was great. Also, I needed 1 more yard to save one of my seasons, which I blame Tom Brady for throwing the late interception. Anyway, Mike Evans, 9 targets, 5 catches, 49 yards, and a touchdown. So how do you feel about these guys? I mean, we've talked about Mike Evans so many times on this show because Yates has basically been completely out on Mike Evans for the entire season. Just how do you feel? I mean, Godwin to me is a guy who you can start every week, no questions asked, regardless. But how do you feel about all 3 of the guys?
It's a fascinating situation. And I would say this. I think that Godwin is that guy that I think we were all excited about going in. We all thought he was going to be the preferred wide receiver, and he hasn't been healthy most of the season. So when you see him healthy on the field, and he's still not healthy. I mean, his fingers are basically bandaged together with duct tape right now. That's where we're at right now with Godwin. Yep. But incredible effort, and you could see that, it's kind of frustrating when you watch it because you say, well, what could have been this season had Godwin been healthy with Brady? And maybe next year we'll get it, we'll see. But I think right now I feel best about Godwin. I always feel good about Antonio Brown with Brady because they seem to be on the same page and have a real rapport. And he also kind of, it's funny, Godwin in a way fits what Brady likes to do, but Antonio Brown fits it even more because of the kind of route runner he is and the little intangible things that Antonio Brown does just instinctively that, him and Brady were just on the same page. And that's what was so frustrating as a Patriots fan last year to see it for a game and a half or whatever it was. And then it was taken away. I think it would have been a much different season for the Pats. But at this point, Evans, my big concern with him is the chronic hamstring injuries that he's had. And I feel like at any given time, that's going to crop up again. It's one thing when a player's, injury plagued. I talk about this in a lot of my shows. There's a difference between injury plagued and injury prone. Injury plagued is the guy that gets hurt in different places and his body's breaking down and all this stuff. Injury prone is a guy that has similar injuries to the same area over and over again. And you have to recognize the two. Plagued is just bad luck. Prone is something you can actually prevent against in terms of avoiding them in fantasy. And I think that when you look at the Evans games from last year, you see these big boom games, and then you see, him missing time at the end there with the hamstring, and then missing time this year with the hamstring, and not having the same kind of burst. And you see it when he faces, great corners too, where great corners can shut him down sometimes. And I think you saw with Lattimore, when Lattimore always gets up just to play him for some reason. I don't know why. Lattimore's been terrible all year. All of a sudden he gets up to play Evans. Same thing with Ramsey. These guys get up to play against each other, but I don't think Evans has the same separation. So I lean more towards Kyle in that sense. I'm probably more out on Mike Evans than I am on the other two. I actually like the other 2 wide receivers more if I had a choice.
Yep. All right, let's talk about the running backs for the Rams here.
Do we have to?
Yes. Oh, you do. Malcolm Brown leads in rushing yards with 20.
Oh, but stop. Hold the phone. Let's give him the offensive player of the year right now.
I mean, to be fair, only 3 carries, though. Darrell Henderson, though, he leads in carries with 8, but only 5 yards. Cam Akers splits the baby. 5 carries, 15 yards. But he does find the end zone through the air. Darrell Henderson, 33 snaps. Malcolm Brown, 27 snaps. Cam Akers, 12 snaps. It is time to play America's favorite game, Joe. If you are forced, you're forced to start a Rams running back going forward for fantasy, Which choice would make you want to vomit the least?
Vomit the least.
Which one?
I think that's definitely the way to put it. God, this is impossible. Vomit the least, I guess, is going forward Cam Akers, because I think that's the direction they want to go, and they're just continuously trying to get him ready to do it. And the plus side of all the frustration of the first 10 weeks of the season, basically, of him being not 100% healthy, is at least now he is not worn out. So he's probably the freshest of all those guys, too, in a way. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. Malcolm Brown will still be the guy, though, in a standard league for the touchdown equity. But I think Akers, at least I can say, okay, there's upside there. And Henderson's fast. Don't get me wrong. I think that's why people look at Henderson when they watch him run. They get excited because they see the burst, they see the speed. But he continuously has trouble sometimes finding the holes. And I think, if you can get him involved in the pass more, in those games where he really shined, like in the game against Buffalo earlier this year, that's what you'd want. But I have some kind of feeling that it's going to be kind of Cam Akers as we go through. And I have not been the guy saying that early in the year, but it feels like we're starting to move towards that a little bit now.
So I think the bottom line, realistically, is you can't start any of them right now. You just can't.
Not happily.
One of them.
No, not without throwing up in my mouth. No.
One of them or more of them is likely going to score a touchdown at some point during the game. We don't know exactly who. I was disappointed. I'm glad Akers found the end zone, but again, just 12 snaps. That's really disappointing. I do think that the guy I would prefer to roster at this point is Akers, just because you're right in that I could see them sort of saying, this is our guy. We've kind of been waiting for him. Let's turn him loose right now. But still, at this point, 12 snaps, even with the touchdown, I definitely can't start him. So they all make me want to vomit equally at this point to start. From a fantasy perspective, they're all fabulous real-life athletes and running backs. All right, let's move off this game. Let's talk about some latest news. We touched on it yesterday, me and Tags, during the waiver wire show. It broke right during the waiver wire show. So let's talk about the Ravens situation here. We know that J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram have actually tested positive for COVID-19. So this is not you're on the COVID-19 list because you are a close contact like Adam Thielen, which we'll talk about in a second.
Right.
This is actual tested positive. Assuming that the game goes forward this week, it's on Thanksgiving, but even if they pushed it back, which I don't think they will unless there's some other thing that comes out, they're out for this week. So it's got to be Gus Edwards here. Maybe Justice Hill gets involved. So what are your thoughts? Let's just start with the very near term. What are your thoughts on Gus Edwards? If you want to talk about Hill, talk about Hill. Gus Edwards just for this game on Thanksgiving against Pittsburgh.
Hey, look, I was the guy in week 3 saying pick up Gus Edwards, so I'm fine. I'm very comfortable.
Ahead of the curve.
Ahead of the curve, baby. And I always put it on tape. That's the lovely thing about me. Right or wrong, everyone's always got the audio or the video on me saying it. I would say that I'm comfortable. I mean, Gus, for a while there, I don't know if it's still the case, I'd have to look right now, but for quite some time, he had the best yards per carry average of any of the 3, by far. So
that's never been his issue, man.
It's
if
never
you're
been
looking at YPC, baby. That's Gus Edwards.
Well,
all day
you know
for
what?
You.
I mean, I think right now we're just looking for YPC period.
Oh,
from
I
the
didn't actually
Ravens.
mean that, Joe. I didn't mean that as like a God, Joe. You're citing. I get it. Like people are like, oh my God, give me a break. Yards per carry. I need analytics. I get it. I completely get it. Yards per carry is a crude stat, but
you know what?
You're
is it
correct.
though? But here you go. Like somebody said, I had this conversation last week with a buddy of mine from PFF, and I said to him, well, here's the thing to understand about that. And you could say, well, it gets inflated because guys who have big runs. And I say, yes, it does get inflated because guys have big runs. Do you not like big runs? Does that not help you win a week? Let's not start to cut our nose despite our face here and understand that when Nick Chubb has 6 yards per carry, it's because Nick Chubb is capable of breaking off a 60-yard run or a 70-yard touchdown. And guess what? When he does that, he wins you the week. So you're looking for guys who have big plays. And I understand that there's, some fault built into that is a simple stat. And yes, you could say, well, it can easily get inflated over one big play. But when a guy continuously has big plays, that also builds into that stat too. So let's not dismiss it altogether either, because big plays win you weeks. And in fantasy football, you're playing for that one game. Can I beat you this week?
I definitely co-sign that. I totally do. And by the way, I don't care about stuff about people who, like, if they get annoyed at it. It is not a useless stat. It is not
No.
sort of the be-all, end-all. I understand that we have moved over the last several years. We have taken leaps
And deep
bounds.
stats are great. But you know what else is good in baseball? OPS.
Well,
you add slugging and on-base percentage, and it gives you a pretty darn good idea with that simple addition how good of a player really is, doesn't it?
You and I could have a very long baseball podcast for discussing the fact that, at this point, again, sometimes I just think it's gotten too far afield from sometimes the actual production is what matters in a lot of ways. And again, please understand, listeners, I'm not saying I'm looking at YPC and I'm saying this is how good somebody is or anything like that.
No, I'm not saying Gus Edwards is Dalvin Cook.
Of course not.
But it is something to recognize in an offense that has struggled this year to run the football, but likes to run the football.
Yeah.
It's important, and he is the last man standing. So, yeah, I'm comfortable with him in the one-game spot where they have to lean on him. And I think if they end up using Hill, you know what they really need to start using more is Lamar Jackson.
Oh, God. Absolutely.
And let me tell you something. I talk about guys who have good schedules coming up for the rest of the time, too.
Yes.
We'll just drop this in there. He's going to play, and I had originally looped in Tennessee as one of them. And there were some moments there against the Titans where he played better. But after this week, he's got Dallas, Cleveland, who gives up a ton of yards through the air, Jacksonville, the Giants, and if you're a moron who plays week 17, Cincinnati. So, I mean, there you go. Like, this is the time. And I know we keep waiting for the switch to flip, and I know it's been very frustrating, but the opportunity at least is still there. And I think next year what you got to do is you got to give him an Allen Robinson type receiver. You got to give him somebody that is really reliable, good possession wide receiver, somebody who can go over the middle and really change this offense a little bit. I know you were hoping Holly Brown could really be healthy and make a big addition there, but you know what? It's not enough, and it's not happening. And Mark Andrews is not enough. You need an Adam Thielen type, an Allen Robinson type, a Terry McLaurin type, somebody who can catch 7 balls in a game and really help move the chains a little bit for them, and that will change the Baltimore Ravens dramatically in 2021 if they can do that. And this year's wide receiver class is a good one too, so we'll see if they can get it in the draft maybe too.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the schedule, by the way, for Lamar Jackson, because I mean, I will say that I am in one league where the trade deadline has not passed yet. So it passes, it's this Thursday. Jackson is a guy who, as I'm in the playoffs already, I am looking at seeing if I can, quote unquote, buy low on, because I know that his manager is frustrated at this point, and given that schedule, I'm willing to do it. With Edwards, look, he already, I know Pittsburgh, of course, is one of the elite defenses in the league, but he's already had a big game. I think it was 16 for 87 and a touchdown there, and that was when he was splitting carries. He's going to have the full load here. He is absolutely somebody who you can start confidently coming into week 12. And given where running backs are gold, if your waiver wire hasn't passed yet, which it probably hasn't, we talked about it yesterday, the news broke. If you need a running back, whatever you need to spend. I don't like percentages of fab at this point because we're way too deep into the season. It's whatever you need to spend to get it if you need a running back. But absolutely locked in starter for me in week 12. Now, you mentioned Thielen as sort of the type of guy maybe that Lamar Jackson could use. Thielen is also on the reserve COVID-19 list. Now, Joe, as far as I could tell, unless I missed something, we don't know that he's actually tested positive. We don't know the details of this one. This could be the close contact thing with him. Have we learned that he has actually tested positive?
Not as of recording this. No, I haven't seen that.
Yep.
But
and again, they don't have to give out any details of it. That's the point. So right now, we do not know that Adam Thielen is out this week. You've seen it with Roethlisberger. You've seen it with Matthew Stafford. You see guys who are on the list, and as long as they test negative, if they're on the list early enough, they can play. So let's not assume necessarily that Thielen is going to be out. However, for purposes of this discussion, let us now, assume that he is going to be out and see what happens. Let's start with Kirk Cousins here, which I know people are like, Kirk Cousins, look, it's not sexy. The guy does have 3 passing touchdowns in 3 of his last 5 games. They've got Carolina. I mean, sometimes you're streaming, sometimes you're looking. Let's assume Thielen is out. Is Cousins a guy who you're like, oh gosh, no, I can never consider starting this guy whatsoever?
No. I mean, well, here's the thing. I mean, this is pretty much just a superflex question. I don't know if he really cracks the top 10 or 12. Although now that Joe Burrow's out, and now that
I think he comes into that like high end.
Yeah, he's probably right around that 11, 12, depending on if he had injuries now. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you this much. He was my favorite quarterback on FanDuel last week at 7,100. So in terms of daily fantasy, it's something that I think flies under the radar where people, especially this past week too, they say, oh, it's Dalvin Cook. It's the Dalvin Cook show. And it's always the Dalvin Cook show.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that you can't throw on the Dallas Cowboys either, because
Right.
you can. So if you had him and then Thielen, or if you had him and Jefferson, you did okay. So I think that I think he's right on that borderline for me. And I think depending on the matchups here right now, look, if you have a quarterback that you like who's in that same fringe, but you hate the matchup and Cousins has a better matchup, I don't think it's a terrible idea to start Cousins. No, I don't.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had to start him in a super flex league, and I've been very happy. And the one great thing about him is that even when Cook goes crazy at the end, you've always got like a 30 or 40% chance that at the 1 yard line, they are going to do the fake and just a wide open tight end, because the entire defense collapses to try to start Cook, to stop Cook. So you've always got the touchdown potential. What about Justin Jefferson here? He's producing, but the last 4 games, targets are 4, 4, 10, and 5. If Thielen is out, I mean, how much would you bump up Jefferson in this game?
A fair amount, but it's kind of like the chicken and the egg thing. I think it always helps to have Thielen on the side at the same time. Just like it's helpful for Calvin Ridley to have Julio healthy. It's just one of those things. Like the more you can get these guys in single coverage, the better everyone is. So I'm not saying Jefferson can't overcome any double coverage or can't do that. He absolutely can. I'm a big fan of Jefferson. I was one of the people saying, hey, this is a guy who's going to slide in and be like Diggs. He's going to have some great games and some other ones. And everyone's like, stop with that guy. And you know what? He's been okay. I mean, he's been Diggs from last year, right? All or nothing, but man, the all is totally worth it as a wide receiver 3. So yeah, I would imagine you'd see at least more targets there. Now, whether or not he converts them, that's a different story. But if you're just trying to make a volume play, then yeah, I think that's some simple logic there that you would imagine they have to go that route. And you'll see, some of the other secondary guys get involved more. Maybe you'll see the tight ends get involved more too. Irv Smith was back and healthy last week. So maybe you'll see a little bit more of that style. But, the offense continues to roll through Dalvin Cook as it should. And, kind of disappointing there. The Vikings had a nice little run. I thought they were going to get back into things. I know the Packers lost, so it's still not done, but I don't know. It's getting tougher. You really should have beaten Dallas last week.
One of my favorite bets this past week was the Cowboys getting 7.5 from the Vikings. That was just prime letdown spot for a little Kirky. Okay, and anybody else? I mean, would you like look at BC Johnson or anything like that if Thielen were out, or is this just like, no, just stick with Jefferson?
I would keep it simple there, because I think the other guys are just one-off. So I think that's only desperation. I mean, in 14-team leagues, you're not going to have a choice. So in the 12-team league, I think you do. I think you have enough bench to make it up there.
I agree with you. Okay, let's get into some just general strategy questions here, Joe. I've got a couple of different sort of, things that fantasy managers who are heading towards the playoffs probably are thinking about, and I get these questions a lot, so I want to ask you, who are much smarter than I am. Let's start with our first one, and I'm going to name these strategies, all right, or name the sections for you so you have it. We'll call this one consolidate or extrapolate. And what I'm basically saying here is, at this point, if you're headed towards
like a '90s hip hop album that just dropped.
Okay, so if you're wondering, I did Google words that rhyme with consolidate, and I looked for like a half hour, and extrapolate was like the closest I could get to what I'm trying to do here. But what I'm basically saying is, fantasy managers who are like, I'm heading towards the playoffs, they have a big tendency at this point, and if the trade deadlines haven't passed yet, or even on the waiver wire, of sort of trying to just get rid of like the excess parts, trying to get rid of the depth. Like my starting lineup is good. I'm in the playoffs. Like I want to build the strongest possible starting lineup. I'm not worried anymore about having some depth. So if there's trade deadline, they'll try to do 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, things like that to basically consolidate, get rid of their depth, make their starting lineup stronger. If the waiver wire, they'll cut like this guy's unexciting.
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I got you.
So the question is, what would you do if you were a fantasy manager at this point? Is that what you would be doing? Just basically being like, let me make sure that I can get my starting lineup strong? Or would you say, I'll have unexciting depth pieces on for purposes of, in case there are injuries or COVID-19?
I feel like I can give you the Mike Tagliere answer, which is, it depends on the player you're acquiring. And that's why Mike is smart. But yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on the player you're acquiring, number one. Number two, depth is really crucial this year, more than ever. And I think coming into the season, everybody was trying to recognize that and speak to it. And just because we're getting into playoffs, it does not mean all of a sudden, no, it's not. However, I'm also the person that says, what good is this guy on your bench if he's never going to see the light of day? If you're telling me you can maybe move one of your better bench players that you're probably not going to play along with your tight end and get a premium tight and get Darren Waller back.
Sure.
Like, if you're going to trade Hawkinson and a wide receiver and you're going to get Waller, okay, now I'm listening. You know, I think those are the kind of things where, you don't get points for bench scoring, you know, unless you're in some kind of wacky league tiebreaker scenario where they have that kind of scoring. But I think that it always makes sense to build as much roster strength as you possibly can. And, you know, deep benches are great, but they might not come up. So it's a very tenuous line to walk. I don't want to be just jettisoning my depth for the sake of it. But I will say this, if there's something that I can significantly improve, and this is why, you know, black book stuff like relative position value matters so much, because it's the idea of, can you improve dramatically in terms of the points per average in that roster slot? Because you got to stop thinking of them as positions and think of them as roster spots. And if you can improve somewhere in a roster spot that's starting, I think that's a trade that I'm willing to make, but I'm not making it just because I can.
Yeah, I think most years, if I'm guaranteed for the playoffs, I'm much more willing to just
it's fair. I know where you're going
up my starting lineup. I think in most years, but this year you said it correctly. I mean, first of all, we'll just speak frankly. Obviously, the COVID-19 situation, generally speaking, around the country is trending in bad
the wrong
direction.
Yes,
which we understood would
point.
Almost certainly happen, given the fact that once, you know, it gets cold and everybody's inside, that was just going to happen. The NFL recognizes it as well, which is why they're putting in these additional protocols that are starting basically last week to make sure guard against it. And we've seen J.K. Dobbins, who literally played a game and had his breakout game, and everybody's like, oh my goodness, I have my RB2 now going forward, who is now at least going to miss one game, possibly more. And so I think this year more than ever, depth is important. So I'm less willing to sort of just say I'm going all in, putting all my chips in here. And if I have an injury, it's going to be problematic. But man, my starting lineup is championship worthy. Having depth sometimes is going to be a little more important this year.
I agree. I would
than
agree.
Others.
Yeah.
So for this year, I'd be.
That's why I say the right player,
Yep.
yes. The guy who makes a difference, yes. But not just because you think they might, or even more of a trap, I think, is, well, the schedule looks really good for this player.
Yep.
Well, we all know that could change on a dime. I mean, you know, like it's an injury can happen, something can happen, but also just, you know, things that look really good on paper don't always come to fruition. You usually do, but not always.
Yep. So we're in agreement basically on how to approach this, but I don't know. One of the things that I do as the podcast host is I take whatever the guest says and I say the exact same thing, but in different words, so it sounds like I'm adding value.
It's a nice style choice. That's I like what you've done there. It's very nice.
That's how I roll.
Yeah.
It's one of my first lessons in podcast hosting.
It's a good one.
Okay. Second, I'll call this one play to lose or cruise. And this actually comes from a listener question. Would you ever tank a matchup, Joe, to influence the playoffs, such as either affecting your seeding so that you get a more perceived favorable matchup, or maybe to keep a stronger team out of the playoffs in your mind? Play to lose or cruise. Would you ever tank a matchup?
It's that same thing I go back to, is like, just because that team looks really good doesn't mean that they can't fall flat on their face. I mean, how many times has a team that's got like one loss lose in the first round of the playoffs because the team just peaked? I know I've had those teams where I've used like two lost teams. I am going to crush everyone. Yes. And then you get there and you're out in the first round. You go, what happened? And I think that typically, no, I'm just playing for every week for the integrity of the league. However, I do not frown upon such practices. I will not look down on you for doing that, because I think there's gamesmanship in there, and I think you can understand that. And if people don't like it, you know what I say to them? Have a better record. Do better. Have a better draft. Maybe up your subscription to FantasyPros. I don't know, something like that. That's what you should tell them, because if they don't like the gamesmanship that goes on, it's part of the game. Okay, so unfortunately, it's not something I would do. I don't necessarily think it's a best practice, but I don't think it's something that people should get bent out of shape about. If you've left your playoff hopes up into this kind of situation, then you have to just kind of accept the situation you're in.
Okay, so I would not get bent out of shape about it either. I mean, if I'm finding
Is this the thing again where you're going to say the thing to me and then you're going to turn around and make it sound like you said it?
Sort of, yes.
Okay.
Sort of.
I just want to be prepared for it.
You can assume that I'm doing that every time, no matter what. So
good. I just want to know. See, we're on the same path.
I'll do a little spin on it, though. I'll do a little spin. If I'm somebody fighting for a playoff spot and I see the guy in first doing it, I'll be upset. But I agree with you that, you know what? Be better. Okay, do better. Do not leave myself in this position next year. I won't have to worry about it. The other thing I will say is that you sort of, I think the word you said is, I don't really look down upon it because, you know, for those reasons, I do look down upon it because this is ridiculous, Joe. We are fantasy analysts. Like, we do this. We look at the data. That's how we make our decisions. And I am like a child in that 100% I believe in fantasy karma. 100%.
Oh, and I do too. Now that I'm a believer in fantasy karma too.
Which is why I would never, ever, ever do that, ever, because you know that this scrub that you are letting into the playoffs by tanking to keep out the best team is going to put up 190 points next week and knock you out of the playoffs and run through the whole thing.
Isn't that funny? Two very logical human beings believing in stupid superstition karma when it comes to fantasy, but I totally do.
My entire life is based on logic. I was a lawyer.
Look how we got here. But look at the level we've gotten to based on that superstition. So I guess we've been rewarded, right?
It's true. Very good. I not just quick fun story for the listeners. I'm not even kidding about this. Okay, there is one. I mean, I don't know how many leagues you're in at this point, Joe. I've tried to cut it back at this point, but given all the analyst leagues, like whatever. But there's one league, right? There's one league that's always kind of your favorite. I've been playing in forever. It's like a pretty sharp league. It's worth some jelly beans. It's fun. And my partner and I, because it's like my old friend, we had the worst luck. You know, your fantasy defense, which is also something that I think is a real thing that you try to figure out how many points you're allowing to your opponent, which you obviously have no control over, but I pretend I do. We had the worst. Okay, we were one of the high scorers in the league, one of those years where every time you went up against the high scorer of the week. And I decided, Joe, I was like, you know what? I got to change things up. I got to change the karma. So every Sunday, and this is before I got into the industry, I basically said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to the grocery store every Sunday during halftime of the 1 o'clock games. I'm going to do the grocery shopping for the week for my house. I'm going to play 2 board games minimum. Let my daughter choose one. Let my son choose one. Doesn't matter what we're doing. We're going to figure it out. I'm going to I'm going to tell my wife, you know what? Take a day off. I've got the kids. Every Sunday I did this. And I'm not kidding. It was the greatest run in the history of fantasy. And I am convinced, okay, that every single player on my fantasy team, real life NFL players,
they knew
their performance was just based on me going grocery shopping. It was good karma, man. It was good karma.
I love it.
I totally did it.
I love it.
That's real. Okay, that's really the first lesson I should give next year is how to do that. That's a good idea. Okay, but next thing, bottom line, don't mess with karma, man. Don't do it. Fantasy karma is real, despite the fact that we are logic-based. In the end, you're going to screw your entire good team if you are able to allow this to happen. Okay, let's get to the next one. Block or sleepwalk, and according to rhymezone.com,
this is a rhymezone.com.
Rhymezone.com says that block.
Oh well, if it's on the internet, it must be true, Dan.
Sleepwalk. All right.
It must be a real rhyme since it's on the internet, and the internet says so.
The interwebs are undefeated, Joe. At this stage, Joe, how much do you factor in blocking your opponents, either with fab or your waiver claims, or do you just try to do what you can to improve your team, or are you letting that?
You know, it depends on the rules and whether or not you're allowed to. Some leagues have somewhere you can't claim guys into the playoffs, so it's important to again, that's the gamesmanship of things. Like if I've got more fab and there's a difference maker player out there, yeah, I'm absolutely going to block somebody from getting them because I can. Because I manage my team better, or I got lucky. And you know what? It's a combination. It's part of management, but it's also quite a bit of luck this year, too, that I haven't had as many injuries that I needed to spend all that fab on. I think that probably is the more likely scenario in 2020. So, yeah, I mean, once again, this is about winning and losing. As long as you're acting within the rules. I mean, I never understood, like, that. There's such whiny crybaby nonsense out there of people saying things like, oh, well, that person bit me and they don't even need another running back. No, you know what? We don't need a lot of things. I don't need another hat, but I'm bald and I like hats. So why can't I have the hat? You see what I'm saying? Like, I don't understand. Like, there's no rules against these certain things. If you want to go pick up that player and you could stop somebody else from having that player, then yeah, you do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And once again, it comes back to, I'm sorry things didn't work out for you. Here's a cookie or here's a lollipop. And then you can go ahead and then you can whine and cry about it.
Yes. This is I say this often, but
what's your lollipop of choice? Do you have one? If like when you're a kid, you go to the doctor, you get the lollipop. Were you a cherry guy? Were you a grape? Where'd you go?
I definitely went cherry. Went cherry. And what's funny, Joe, is lollipops are just solid, man. I feel like you're just sitting there even now as a grown up, but my children are completely obsessed with lollipops. Like it's legitimately like a magic stick. Like they'll be like going crazy and they'll be like, I'll just whip it out. How's this?
Boom, how's
what
that?
About this?
Boom.
Boom. And they're like, yes, I will do whatever.
Yeah, but then everything in your house is sticky. You walk around, you're like, why is the couch sticky? I don't understand.
To be fair, if I cared at this point what my house looked like or anything, then I would be a better person than I am. Because
that's why you don't go outside the radius of where you see Dan's face in the camera.
Correct. If you're watching on YouTube.com, you see
3 feet to the left, 3 feet to the right on YouTube. It's a complete and utter chaos, but it looks good. This shot looks good.
This is literally my happy place. That's it. I don't leave here ever. I sleep in this chair. This is all I do because outside is danger zone. I agree with you completely. I do this often. If I am, there's two ways, Joe, I feel like, of thinking about fab when you're just going through it. Generally speaking, it's a lot of people spend it early because they think they've got to do what they can to win early, and it's very competitive, and they think later on in the year, half your league's going to be out of the playoffs. So the competition won't be as much. Some people hoard it a little bit and say, you know what, if I can get by at this point, I'm going to be able to do whatever I want. I don't really have a strong preference. I generally like to be kind of judicious with my fab early because I do like having it late. But if you have it late, especially, use it. I mean, it's a weapon. Use it to whatever you can. That's not bad karma, by the way, just to be clear. Blocking your opponent is just smart. So use it like that.
But also, you don't know when that player might help your team.
Correct.
If that player's worth getting, well, that guy's got more money than me. Why did he get him and I didn't? It's not fair. I need him.
Right.
What kind of whiny crybaby nonsense is that? Stop your whining. Those are the same people tell me YPC doesn't matter at all.
If you're playing with somebody who wants like that, by the way, find a new league because that's just weird.
Yeah, we're just encouraging everyone to find new leagues.
That's all we're doing. Everybody quit your league.
Just quit your league.
Get a new league. Okay, let's finish up with mailbag questions here, Joe. So the one thing I'll say is usually I post on Twitter on Monday night that asks some trade rest of season questions for me and Kyle. Obviously, Kyle wasn't on the show, so I didn't do that. But we do have a mailbag. I don't even know if people know that at this point. Mailbag at FantasyPros.com. You can send in your questions. We look at them. We try to respond when we can. So let's get this started here. And you mentioned the playoff schedule early on for Lamar Jackson, but there is a question from Tom. I'm in the playoffs, guaranteed. I feel like my roster, though, is really not that strong overall. Any moves you would make to stash players, he doesn't specify the positions for the playoffs, but who are a couple of guys or players, whatever, who are, look like they have pretty decent playoff schedules. You mentioned, of course, Lamar Jackson already.
Right. Well, if you're looking to just kind of get in the playoffs the next 2 weeks, I think the Miami Dolphins players have a lot of love there. I mean, they play the Jets and the Bengals back-to-back weeks there. So if you're looking to try to get in the playoffs, I mean, if Jakeem Grant's still floating around there, that's a guy that I would be picking up. If you can still make a trade for Devontae Parker, that would be a guy that I would look at. Once you're in the playoffs, though, I mean, the Rams schedule is certainly intriguing. Yes, they play New England, but, you could score in New England. Deshaun Watson proved that. But you've got the Jets in Seattle there, too. Sorry if it sounds like I'm picking on the Jets. The Titans, after they play the Indianapolis Colts this week, they take on Cleveland, Jacksonville, Detroit, and Green Bay, who's given up a fair amount of points too, and then Houston if you're a moron playing in Week 17. Have I mentioned if you're a moron playing in Week 17?
You
have.
I
mentioned that enough?
Yes,
maybe a third time, maybe just for good measure. Why would you do that to yourself? You spend all this time to get things decided by Week 17 where hardly anybody's playing.
Yep.
All right, sorry.
Yeah.
I think I had to let go a little bit. But yeah, and I also think if you're looking as well, you got 2 games for the Indianapolis Colts against the Houston Texans there, so Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor, those are 2 guys. And Taylor had, bounced back a little bit last week. We'll see if that's a trend.
We'll get there in a second.
Yeah, and Hines leads his team in receptions. I don't know if that's sad or impressive or both, but take it for what you will. So yeah, that's where I'd be going.
Yeah, so there are a couple, let's assume your trade deadline is passed, and if you can't add, any of these guys who might be available, who are that's really what I'm looking at this point, because assuming your trade deadline is passed, I know we can rag on the Jets because they are terrible. But if you look at, their receivers right now, Perman and Mims are getting a little bit more love. Las Vegas, Seattle, Rams aren't good, but then Cleveland. So they have a pretty decent schedule going forward. For tight ends, again, the Bears have a pretty decent schedule with Detroit, Houston, Minnesota, and Jacksonville coming up. So Jimmy Graham might be out there. Again, you don't really want to rely on that. Gronk, if he's been dropped, if his manager has been, that we've talked about, the Bucs have a pretty good closing schedule. DSTs, by the way, I don't know if you do this at this point, Joe, or if you think it's too early. If you're in the playoffs, are you stashing DSTs for your playoff run?
It's funny. In the second half of a season, I am one that if somebody drops a good defense, I'll pick them up and I'll be that jerk on like a Saturday morning, late morning fab for like $1. Like somebody did this in Flex where they dropped the Bucs defense, and I picked them up. So now I have the Colts defense and the Bucs defense, and I've been playing matchups with them ever since.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think it does. Like I would rather have two defenses because once again, we're talking about once you get in the playoffs, maximizing what you can do there in those spots. So if you can do that, and it's even on a defensive side of things, you do it because that's more valuable. That's going to count and matter more than the fifth guy on your depth chart at wide receiver.
I often roster two defenses at this point because it makes a huge
because you know all those people who love to stream every now and then they'll drop somebody they shouldn't or they don't look far enough ahead, and then there's another advantage you could take.
So I will mention a couple defenses that have good playoff schedules. At least Seattle, they're playing better. I know their pass defense is abysmal, but their defense as a whole is playing better. They get the Jets, Washington, Rams, or whatever. But you should be able to get some pressure on Goff. Cleveland has Baltimore, which is no good, but then they get the Giants and the Jets in week 15 and 16. Arizona gets the Giants, the Eagles, and the Niners, and Dallas against Cincinnati, San Francisco, and Philadelphia. So pretty, probably widely available defenses there that are pretty good. Let's go to Eric. I'm receiver needy, and Curtis Samuel, Deebo Samuel, and Cole Beasley are available.
Okay, I don't know we're going to third Samuel. I wanted to see if you could bring a third Samuel in there.
Is there? No, I don't have it. Who would you prioritize big ups? I don't know the format, Joe. Let's assume half PPR.
Well, look, Cole Beasley's been pretty steady. I mean, in the last 6 weeks or so, I mean, the target volume's been there, and Josh Allen's played pretty well. So, I think that in a half PPR, I'm very impressed with what Curtis Samuel's done in the last 6 games as well. He has more touchdown equity, so that, to me, is the way I would lean in the standard. But in the full-point PPR, Beasley, if I had to split the difference, I would probably just, look and see what my lineup would need more. Am I somebody that needs a little bit more volume, a little bit more weekly floor? Am I somebody that needs a little bit more boom for my buck? And if I need more boom, then I would go with Samuel. So I would kind of split the difference that way. Higher floor PPR. No Deebo for me. I'm just not confident right now in what's going on with San Francisco at all. And I don't think anybody should be.
The one thing that I will point out that, I haven't seen too much on it, but the way that they described John Brown's injury was not particularly optimistic, and it was at the end of the game, so people didn't really care. They had a bye coming up, but he said, we'll see how it looks in the coming days and weeks.
That's a good point.
So Cole Beasley's stock would rise there. So again, higher floor there, but I do like Curtis Samuel, and he is getting heavily involved here going forward. From Jonathan, what's your general strategy, Joe, in dynasty leagues? He says he goes super young. He doesn't even trade unless it's for draft picks, because he's always building for the long haul, but so many of his league mates treat it like it's a redraft league. So he wants to know basically how should he approach, generally speaking, dynasty leagues.
3-year window. You want a team that's going to be good for a 3-year window, and I'll tell you why. Because every year you get a new crop of rookies. So you could always fix problems. You could always go into that well and you could hit on somebody. I mean, look at how many great wide receivers. Look where Claypool was probably drafted compared to somebody like where Clyde Edwards-Helaire was drafted, right? And Claypool's having a better fantasy season. Let's just call it what it is, okay? And I think that's why you try to win the 3-year window. I don't want to treat it like a redraft, but I think there's always a win now attitude with an eye for the future, because what happens is if you're constantly that young team, you're constantly in this cycle of guys trying to get up to speed, and like you're in this cycle of Cam Akers and rookie running backs and J.K. Dobbins and going, oh, this was a good game, and then at best you're like, you're like a 6-win team, and I think you're kind of constantly spinning your wheels if you're always too young. But at the same time, I think you need to have some youth as well, because that's also your draft cap. Yeah, it's also your trade capital. Excuse me. That's where you can bring in a difference maker player if you want to make the push. Flags fly forever. Go win championships in Dynasty. Most Dynasty leagues don't last more than 5 years anyway. So that's another note to everybody out there. 3-year window, play to win with an eye to the future. I think that's the best combination of things to do.
I completely agree, and I want to hammer down that point that you made at the very end, which is 5 years. That's a pretty good run for a dynasty.
It is.
I know everything goes in right. You're like, this is going to last forever. This is the best thing ever. Your first league, you're like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. No, dude. Most of them die out. Don't play for like 5 or 6 years down the line.
Play for 3, 4. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly the way I approach it as well. All right, let's finish up with a couple of quick hitters here from Mandy. This is what I mentioned. I held Jonathan Taylor all year. Is it time? Can I unleash the beast, or would you still not feel comfortable starting him despite his great schedule?
2 games versus Houston, I had to take a shot. I just got to. I hate it. It's frustrating. I understand. I'll hold your hand with you the whole time. But I think you got to take a shot against Houston. The numbers just are too good not to.
What about this weekend against Tennessee? Because then they get Houston, Las Vegas, Houston. What about this weekend against Tennessee?
I'm less confident. I'd have to see the rest of the roster, but I think it's certainly under consideration. It has to be under consideration. Tennessee hasn't been great defensively either this year.
The worst. I'm probably rolling them out there, and then we will all have a virtual hug to console ourselves when Nyheim Hines gets 40 touches. From William, my trade deadline has not actually passed yet. Should I trade Josh Jacobs and Dallas Goedert for Derrick Henry in a PPR league? And he notes that he has Travis Kelce.
Josh Jacobs and Dallas Goedert. He has Kelsey already, so Goddard doesn't matter.
So Goddard is basically
it's Derrick Henry season. I mean, whenever we turn the page and from, once we get into fall, it's pumpkin spice lattes and Derrick Henry. That's what you have. And they're both delicious. They're both wonderful. I love them both equally, and I don't care how basic you think I am. But Derrick Henry running the football over people. Tennessee's got a good schedule coming up too. That's something to keep in mind. So I mean, it's not a knock on Josh Jacobs. It's just this is that time of year where Derrick Henry starts to really just turn it on.
I mean, you don't care who they're playing, but I mean, week 14, Jacksonville, week 15.
Yeah, I was going to say, they have a good schedule too. Jacksonville, Detroit, Green Bay, right? I talked about them earlier. Yeah.
And again, if you're nuts,
if you're a stupid person, Houston, you get in that last game.
And
they're going to need to be playing week 17. Correct. That's a team that's not going to have things settled for them by week 17.
So go ahead. Absolutely. Go. That 100%. I do that deal. Last question from Jim. What are your thoughts on Jerry Jeudy going forward? Tags always talks about not relying on bad offenses, and I love his talent, but I just don't feel comfortable feeling like I can throw him out there every game without thinking about it.
Yeah, he's had a couple rough matchups the last couple weeks too. Yeah. I think it's something that if you start him, you have to look at the rest of your lineup and say, okay, maybe Mike Williams I start along with him as a boomer bust guy because I might need more. I think that's the kind of thing you have to look. This is more of a lineup construction question than a theoretical question for me, because Jerry Jeudy does have enormous talent. I think Denver has shown you that they can get him the football, and this latter half of the season it's been a little bit better for Jerry Jeudy. But the last 2 week matchups were not good. But it doesn't mean you should be scared off completely either. So I think it's a matter of how you manage your roster and really look deeply at the matchups. And I encourage people to look at the cornerback matchups too, because that's something that people don't do enough of. It's something that, someone who plays DFS like I do, you start to get more akin to, and that's one of the great bleed overs from playing DFS into your season long leagues is when you do that, you start to recognize that it's easier to plug and play wide receivers too and get more out of them.
Yep, absolutely agree. And when we talk about waiver wire, it's usually where for the running backs, I'm very much looking at this week for the wide receivers. I'm kind of looking at the long haul because I think there's always that receiver that you can pick up who has the favorable matchup against a specific cornerback that specific week. So I'm never worried about like, oh, I need this guy because I feel like he's going to be so good, right? I'm like, whatever, man. I'll take the long-term view, and I know I can find somebody like the Cole Beasleys of the world here. Like, oh, great, there's a guy I can slot in there. All right, Joe, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Remind everybody where they can find you and all your great work.
Well, you can find me on the Twitter machine at Joe Pisapia17. New baseball black book will be out in December. That's very exciting. And of course, you can capture me on Sports Grid, 12 to 2 on Fantasy Sports Today, 5 days a week. And of course, on Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. Eastern with the Eric Young, the Impact, well, he was champ a couple weeks ago. He's not champ anymore. And Matt Stryker and me talking football, 8 a.m. Sunday on Fantasy Game Day. So it's always a pleasure to spend quality time with my friend Dan. Now go clean up that mess on either side of you.
Yeah, I'm never leaving this little zone that I'm in right now, but I appreciate it anyway. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to have a little bit of a longer episode here on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We'll touch on some Thanksgiving DFS and our start sit, so make sure you tune in then, and I'll talk to you then. Looking for useful content, fantasy relevant information, and the data that's going to help your team win? Then go ahead and subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. And while you're at it, give us a follow over on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Fantasy Pros so you can dominate all your leagues.